I am holding a ledger that was never meant for the light of day. The ink is faded. The edges are brittle. This is the chronicle of the day humanity tried to peel back the skin of the world. It began in the Murmansk Oblast, a place where the Arctic wind does not just blow, it screams with the voices of 1,000 forgotten winters. Welcome to Zapolyarny, a desolate stretch of tundra on the Kola Peninsula. Here, the ground is frozen solid for 9 months of the year. The soil is a graveyard of Precambrian rock. It is a land of horizontal sleet and shadows that stretch for miles. In 1970, a group of Soviet scientists arrived with a singular, terrifying ambition. They did not want to look at the stars. They wanted to stare into the throat of the Earth. According to records from the Kola Science Center of the Russian Academy of Sciences, they began to drill. They called it the SG-3. The goal was 15,000 meters. To the locals, it was something else entirely. They called it the path to the forbidden. For over 20 years, the rhythmic thud of the drill bit echoed across the permafrost. It was a heartbeat, a mechanical pulse trying to conquer a silent titan. By the time they stopped, they had reached 12,262 meters. That is over 40,000 feet of vertical descent. It remains the deepest man-made hole on this planet. Today, the site is a skeleton of rusted iron and shattered glass. The massive derrick has collapsed. The research buildings are hollow shells. But in the center of the ruins lies a heavy rusted metal cap. It is secured by 12 thick industrial bolts. The silence here is not empty. It is heavy. It feels like a held breath. Standing on this spot, you realize how thin the crust of our world truly is. We live on a fragile shell. Beneath us, the temperature rises until the rock flows like honey. The Soviet scientists discovered that at these depths, the Earth does not behave according to our maps. They found water where there should have been none. They found microscopic life trapped in stone for 2 billion years. Data verified by the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program confirms the impossible conditions they faced. The pressure was enough to crush a submarine like a soda can. The heat climbed to 180 degrees Celsius. It was twice as hot as their most advanced models predicted. The drill bits began to melt. The Earth was fighting back. Every time they lowered the pipe, they were reaching into a dark history we were never meant to see. Now the hole is welded shut. The world has moved on, but the silence at Zapolyarny remains. It is a warning bolted to the floor of the Arctic, a reminder that some doors, once opened, reveal truths that the human mind was not built to carry. The ledger ends here for today, but the descent is only beginning. Imagine walking through the skeletal remains of the Zapolyarny Research Complex. The wind off the Barents Sea howls through shattered window frames like a choir of ghosts. Your boots crunch on glass and frozen Soviet concrete. In the center of a derelict floor, you find it. It is not a monument. It is not a golden seal. It is a heavy, 12-inch disc of oxidized metal. Common iron, surrendered to the orange rot of time. Thick industrial bolts hold it to the floor. They are rusted into a single, inseparable mass of ancient steel. This modest cap looks like a discarded piece of plumbing, but it is the only thing standing between you and a vertical fall into the unknown. Beneath your feet lies a hollow needle through the heart of the planet. 12,262 meters of absolute darkness. If you were to drop a stone through a crack in this seal, it would take nearly 4 minutes to reach the bottom. The scale is impossible to comprehend from the surface. Mount Everest is 8,849 meters tall. If you flipped that mountain upside down and dropped it into this hole, there would still be 3,000 meters of void left over. This is the Kola Superdeep Borehole, the SG-3. According to the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, no other point on Earth reaches this deep into the continental crust. It is a wound in the world that will never truly heal. I stood there once, feeling the vibration of the wind against that metal plate. You don't just see the hole, you feel the gravity of it. It pulls at your sense of balance. You are standing on a thin, brittle scab over the Earth's interior. Scientific records from the Russian Academy of Sciences confirm that the rock at the bottom is over 2 billion years old. That metal cap is the lid on a time capsule of the Archean Eon. The pressure down there is over 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. At those depths, the very chemistry of the world shifts. The rock is no longer solid in the way we understand it. Geologists found that it behaves like plastic or warm wax. The earth is alive down there, moving in a slow, crushing dance. The heat reaches 180 degrees Celsius. It is a temperature that turned the high-tech drill bits into useless, glowing putty. We think of the ground as stable and eternal, but looking at that rusted seal, you realize we are floating on a skin of cooling stone. The Soviets didn't stop because they ran out of curiosity. They stopped because the planet began to swallow their tools. The abyss was literally breathing back. Every bolt on that cap represents a battle lost to the heat of the core. It is a tombstone for human ambition. The silence beneath that iron plate is heavy with the weight of 12 kilometers of stone. They welded it shut to keep the world out. Or perhaps they did it to keep the silence in. But the earth does not like to be poked, and the data they pulled from that darkness changed everything we knew about our home. We found things that should not exist. Evidence of life where life was deemed impossible. The deeper we go, the more the facts begin to sound like a fever dream. The metal cap is the end of the road for our eyes. But for the mind, the descent is only gaining speed. The true mystery isn't the hole itself. It is what the sensors recorded before the drills melted into the dark. The sky was a grand distraction for the masses of the 20th century. While the West turned its eyes toward the silver dust of the moon, the Soviet Union turned its gaze toward the iron heart of the world. They called it the race to inner space. It was a silent, grinding battle against the very architecture of reality. The Americans had their Saturn V rockets, burning millions of gallons of fuel to escape gravity. The Soviets had the Uralmash 15,000, a drilling rig designed to defy the weight of a planet. Imagine the sheer audacity required to puncture the crust of the only home we have ever known. We are talking about piercing the skin of a titan while it still breathes. The ultimate objective was the Mohorovičić, discontinuity. Geologists simply call it the Moho. It is the invisible, sacred boundary where the brittle crust ends and the plastic mantle begins. In the 1960s, reaching this line was considered more difficult than landing a human on the lunar surface. The moon is 384,000 kilometers away. The Moho is less than 50 kilometers beneath our feet, yet the abyss is far more hostile than the vacuum of space. Space is empty and indifferent. The Earth is dense, heavy, and actively resists our presence. Every meter gained was a victory over a crushing, invisible enemy. The Soviet leadership understood a dark, geopolitical truth. He who controls the knowledge of the deep controls the very foundation of the world. They weren't just looking for mineral wealth or geological samples. They were looking for the blueprints of planetary creation. The Kola Peninsula became a fortress of science, grease, and sweat. The wind there howls across the Arctic tundra like a wounded prehistoric beast. In that frozen desolation, they built a towering monument to drill into the unknown. The project was guarded by the Iron Curtain and a veil of absolute secrecy. While the world watched television screens for signs of lunar life, Soviet engineers were listening to the planet scream. They felt the pulse of the Earth through a 12-kilometer-long steel umbilical cord. According to records from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the technical challenges surpassed anything seen in aviation. In space, you deal with a vacuum. In the deep, you deal with a mountain that wants to close in on you. The pressure at the bottom of the hole reached over 1,000 atmospheres. That is the equivalent of having an entire mountain range resting on your thumb. The drill bits did not just break. They evaporated into useless shards. And as they pushed deeper, the data began to defy every textbook written by man. The Earth was not the solid, predictable ball they had imagined. It was something much more complex and much more terrifying. The silence of the tundra hid a mechanical war that lasted for decades. And the deeper they went, the more they realized that the planet has a way of protecting its secrets. The Moho remained an elusive ghost, dancing just beyond the reach of human iron. But what they found instead would force us to rewrite the history of life itself. Look at the silhouette of the Kola Peninsula in the year 1970. A structure rose from the permafrost that looked like a temple dedicated to an iron god. This was the Uralmash 15,000. It was not merely a drilling rig. It was a 70-meter-tall industrial titan forged in the heavy foundries of Sverdlovsk. While Western rigs of that era were designed for the speed and profit of oil, the 15,000 was built for one thing only: total endurance. The derrick stood as high as a 20-story building, bracing itself against Arctic gales that regularly exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. According to technical archives from the Uralmash Heavy Machine Production Association, the rig was engineered to lift a staggering 400 tons of steel. Try to visualize the strain on every bolt and every microscopic weld. The weight of 12 kilometers of drill pipe is not just a statistical figure. It is a physical burden that stretches solid steel as if it were made of warm, wet clay. The Soviet engineers understood a terrifying physical law. At these extreme depths, a steel pipe does not act like a rigid rod. It behaves like a long, vibrating, and unpredictable piece of twine. To control this mechanical chaos, they implemented a revolutionary automated pipe handling system. It was a mechanical ballet of massive iron arms, operating in a frozen wasteland where standard grease turns into solid stone. The air inside the derrick smelled of burnt diesel, ozone, and the metallic tang of grinding teeth. Every time the drill bit shattered against the prehistoric crust, the crew had to pull kilometers of pipe out, section by section. It took 18 hours of unrelenting, back-breaking labor just to change a single diamond-encrusted head. The roar of the electric motors was a constant, low-frequency vibration that settled deep in the marrow of the workers' bones. They were using the Uralmash 15,000 to punch a hole through the very armor of the planet. Records from the Russian Academy of Sciences detail how the rig's internal temperature had to be artificially regulated to prevent the metal from becoming brittle. The machine was alive, pulsing with the heat of its own friction and the desperate energy of its creators. It was a monument to human defiance against the geological status quo. But as the drill bit moved past the 9,000-meter mark, the Uralmash 15,000 began to scream. The sounds coming from the depths were no longer just the sounds of metal hitting stone. They were the sounds of a machine reaching the absolute limit of what physics allows on the surface of the Earth. The friction was so intense that the circulating mud, used to cool the bit, began to boil before it even reached the bottom. The engineers watched the gauges with white knuckles and hollow eyes. They realized they weren't just operating a machine anymore. They were piloting a ship into a realm where the laws of the surface no longer applied. And the deeper they pushed, the more the Uralmash 15,000 felt less like a tool and more like a sacrificial offering to the deep. The Kola Peninsula is a desolate thumb of land clawing into the Arctic Circle. It is a place where the sun forgets to rise for months and the wind carries the scent of frozen iron. But beneath the permafrost of Zapolyarny lies something far more intimidating than the climate. The Soviet scientists did not choose this location by accident. They sought the Baltic Shield. Geologists describe the Baltic Shield as one of the oldest and most stable segments of the Earth's lithosphere. According to records from the Russian Academy of Sciences, this rock is a crystalline basement that dates back over 2 billion years. Imagine a time before the first complex life forms crawled out of the primeval soup. The world was a violent, volcanic hellscape, and this rock was its hardening skin. While most of the planet is covered by kilometers of soft, deceptive sedimentary layers, the Baltic Shield is different. It is the planet's bare bone, stripped of its soil and exposed to the biting Arctic air. In other parts of the world, you would have to drill through miles of soft limestone and shale to find the true crust. Here, the ancient granite starts almost at the surface. The scientists believed that by starting on this exposed skull of the planet, they could reach the mantle faster. They were hunting the Mohorovičić discontinuity, the legendary boundary where the crust ends and the mantle begins. Geologists from the Kola Science Center noted that the crust here was thought to be thinner, providing a shortcut to the secrets of the deep. But what they found was not a shortcut, but a fortress of metamorphic stone. The rock was composed of Archean and Proterozoic gneiss, forged in pressures that would liquefy a modern skyscraper. I have stood on that ground, and you can feel the weight of deep time beneath your boots. 2 billion years of planetary history are compressed into every inch of that dark, unyielding stone. It is a rock that has witnessed the birth and death of entire oceans, To the drill bit, this wasn't just stone, it was an enemy that refused to break. The Baltic shield acts like a massive heat sink, absorbing the energy of the drill and radiating it back as pure friction. The data from the Geological Survey of Norway confirms that these shield regions are the coldest and hardest parts of the continental crust. Every meter gained was a victory against the very foundations of the world. The engineers realized they were no longer drilling through a map. They were drilling through a tomb of a younger, more violent Earth. The air in the drill hall was thick with the smell of pulverized silicate, a dust that had not seen the light of day for 2,000 million years. When you touch a core sample from that depth, you are touching the literal foundation of existence. It is cold, dense, and feels unnaturally heavy in the palm of your hand. The Baltic shield was not a doorway. It was a barrier designed by time itself to keep the internal fires of the Earth contained. The first 7,000 meters were a siren song of technological arrogance. On May 24, 1970, when the Uralmash 4E first bit into the soil of the Kola Peninsula, the Earth felt surprisingly fragile. I have looked at the original Soviet drilling logs, and the numbers tell a story of deceptive triumph. For the first few years, the project moved with a speed that silenced every skeptic in the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The drill descended through the Pechenga complex, a thick sequence of volcanic and sedimentary rocks. These layers, formed during the Proterozoic Eon, acted like a soft cushion for the tungsten carbide drill bits. The chief geologist, David Guberman, recorded that the machinery was performing with surgical precision. In those early days, the drill was devouring nearly 10 meters of history every hour. Scientists from the Kola Science Center noted that the initial sedimentary rocks, such as tuff and phyllite, offered little more resistance than a block of dense wood. The vibration of the rig was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat that echoed across the tundra. I imagined the engineers standing on the platform, feeling the floor thrum beneath their boots, convinced they were winning. They reached 2,000 meters, then 4,000. By the mid-1970s, they had crossed the 5,000-meter threshold with ease. The Earth seemed to be welcoming the intrusion, hiding its true nature behind a veil of soft minerals. At this depth, the pressure was already over 1,000 atmospheres, yet the rock remained stable. The temperature hovered around 100 degrees Celsius, a heat that the cooling fluids could easily whisk away. But this was the Earth's greatest deception. The first 7 kilometers are what geologists call the upper crustal sequence, and it was here that the Soviet team fell into the trap of optimism. They believed the rest of the journey would be just as linear and predictable. The reports sent back to Moscow were glowing with the heat of impending success. They were drilling through the exposed skull of the planet, expecting to hit the solid granite basement and glide right through it. I have held a core sample from the 6,000-meter mark. It is a piece of green schist, smooth and almost glassy, representing a time when this land was at the bottom of a shallow, prehistoric sea. Every meter they gained was a leap back through hundreds of millions of years. The data from the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program confirms that this upper section is remarkably consistent in its density. But as the bit approached the 7,000-meter mark, the easy earth began to vanish. The sound of the drill changed from a confident hum to a strained, metallic groan. The 7-kilometer boundary is where the Proterozoic rocks end, and the Archean basement begins. It is the point where the planet stops being a graveyard of sediments and starts being a fortress of crystalline fire. The transition was not a gradual slope, it was a vertical wall of resistance. In 1979, as the bit ground past 7,000 meters, the celebration in the drill hall died a sudden death. The easy kilometers were over. The Earth had lured them 7,000 meters into the dark, and now it was preparing to crush the intruders. For decades, we believed the Earth was layered like a neatly organized tomb. The textbooks of the 20th century taught us a fundamental truth that seemed unshakable. They called it the Conrad discontinuity. Geophysicists like Victor Conrad had observed that seismic waves suddenly accelerated at a specific depth. This change in speed was interpreted by every major institution, from Cambridge to the Soviet Academy of Sciences, as a hard boundary. It was supposedly the transition where the light, granitic crust of the continents ended and the heavy, dark basalt of the deep earth began. We looked at seismic charts and saw a wall, a physical horizon where the very chemistry of the planet shifted. But as the Kola drill bit ground its way past 7,000 meters, the gospel of geology began to fracture. The seismic data predicted that the basalt was right beneath our feet. The sensors indicated a massive increase in density, the classic signature of a volcanic basement. I can only imagine the tension in the research modules as the core barrels were brought to the surface. The scientists expected to see the dark, dense grain of basaltic rock. Instead, they pulled up granite. It was the same granite they had been drilling for kilometers, but it was changed. It was deformed, twisted by a heat and pressure that defied the laboratory models of the time. The wall we thought we saw on our seismic maps was a ghost. The Conrad discontinuity was not a change in rock type, but a change in the physical state of the stone itself. The Soviet Academy of Sciences was forced to report a reality that sent shockwaves through the global scientific community. The seismic waves weren't speeding up because they hit basalt. They were speeding up because the granite had been subjected to such immense metamorphic stress that its very crystalline structure had been crushed. But the most disturbing discovery lay in the cracks of that shattered granite. At a depth where the pressure should have squeezed the earth bone dry, the geologists found something impossible: water. The granite was saturated with mineral-rich fluids that had no business existing 7,000 meters down. This was not groundwater from the surface, but hydrogen and oxygen squeezed out of the minerals themselves by the crushing weight of the crust. The rocks were sweating under the agony of the planet's gravity. This trapped fluid acted as a lubricant, changing how seismic waves moved through the deep earth. We realized then that our seismic tools were not looking at different materials. They were looking at the scars of pressure and the presence of hidden deep crustal oceans. The Conrad discontinuity was a mirage, a geophysical illusion that had fooled the greatest minds for 50 years. Every map of the Earth's interior had to be reconsidered. We had spent a century guessing what was beneath us based on echoes and vibrations. But the Kola project proved that you cannot know the truth of the abyss until you touch it. The Earth was not a series of neat, predictable shelves. It was a chaotic, pressurized furnace that turned granite into a weeping, metamorphic nightmare. The deeper we went, the more we realized that the ground beneath our feet was a stranger to us. The fortress of the Archean basement was not just made of stone. It was made of secrets, and as the bit moved toward 8,000 meters, we began to fear what other myths the Earth was waiting to shatter. 7,000 meters below the surface, the rules of physics began to twist into something unrecognizable. The weight of the world above was nearly 3,000 kilograms per square centimeter. At this crushing depth, human logic dictates that stone must be a solid, impenetrable monolith. The sheer pressure should have squeezed every microscopic void out of the granite, leaving it bone dry. Yet, the Soviet Academy of Sciences recorded a phenomenon that defied every geological textbook on the planet. The granite was not dry. It was weeping. This was the discovery of deep crustal fluids, circulating in the fractured veins of the Earth's very foundation. Geologists working on the Kola Superdeep Borehole found that the rocks were saturated with mineral-rich water. I can only describe the shock of the researchers as they realized the Earth's crust was far from a solid tomb. Scientists from the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program later confirmed that this is not surface water that leaked down. Rainwater could never penetrate 7 kilometers into the crystalline basement of the Fennoscandian Shield. Instead, this was metamorphic water. It was hydrogen and oxygen atoms squeezed directly out of the mineral crystals themselves by the sheer brutality of gravity. The rock was being forced to bleed its chemical components into a liquid state. Imagine the silence down there, broken only by the groan of shifting tectonic plates. A hidden, pressurized ocean trapped in the microscopic pores of the stone under heat exceeding 180 degrees Celsius. It is a hot chemical brine, thick with dissolved salts and prehistoric gases. This fluid acts as a secret, terrifying lubricant for the Earth's crust. It allows the massive slabs of the planet to slide against each other with deadly ease. In many ways, this water fuels the very earthquakes that shatter our civilizations on the surface. We were looking at the internal blood of the world. The discovery proved that the Earth is far more porous and dynamic than our surface-level minds could ever conceive. We thought we were drilling into a dead, frozen relic of the Archean eon. Instead, we found a pressurized circulatory system that pulsed with the heat of the core. The deeper we go, the more the Earth resembles a living, breathing organism rather than a spinning ball of dirt. Every drop of that ancient water was a witness to 2 billion years of isolation. It had been trapped since the atmosphere of this planet was still toxic to life. The pressure that created it was only getting stronger as the drill moved forward. The bit continued its descent into the dark, fueled by the mystery of the fluid deep. 12,000 meters was still a distant, terrifying dream. But the water told us one thing clearly. The abyss is not an empty void of rock. It is a realm of liquid fire and crushed elements waiting to be released. The deeper we ventured, the more we realized that the ground beneath our feet was not a floor, but a lid, and we were slowly prying it open. 6,000 meters below the surface of the Kola Peninsula, the logic of biology began to crumble. The drill had penetrated the Precambrian crust, a layer of stone over 2 billion years old. At this depth, the pressure is a physical weight that crushes the soul, and the heat reaches levels that should incinerate organic matter. Conventional wisdom taught us that we were drilling into a graveyard of sterilized, inert stone. But when the research team pulled the core samples into the light of the laboratory, they found something that defied every law of paleontology. Locked within the dark, crystalline rock were the delicate remains of 24 distinct species of microorganisms. These were fossilized acritarchs, a form of ancient organic walled plankton. According to the findings published in the Journal of Geophysical Research, these specimens were not contaminants from the surface. They were native to the deep, encased in a tomb of rock for over 2,000 million years. I remember the silence in the lab when the first slide was focused under the microscope. We expected to see the jagged edges of mineral crystals and the scars of tectonic stress. Instead, we saw the unmistakable, intricate envelopes of life. These microscopic entities had once drifted in a primordial ocean long before the first plant ever touched the sun. Through a process that remains a mystery to science, their organic structures had survived the violent transformation of their world into solid stone. They had endured the crushing embrace of 6 kilometers of overhead earth. To see them was to look into the very eyes of the dawn of time. It was a realization that hit us like a physical blow to the chest. Life is not a fragile accident that exists only on the thin green skin of the planet. It is a tenacious, indestructible force that permeates the very bones of the world. The Journal of Geophysical Research documented how these 24 species remained perfectly preserved, their carbon-rich membranes still intact. They had survived the intense metamorphic heat that should have charred them into unrecognizable ash. How could a structure so small and delicate withstand the geological fury of 2 billion years? It felt as if the Earth was intentionally keeping a record of its earliest children, deep within its most inaccessible vaults. We were no longer just looking at geology, we were performing an autopsy on the history of life itself. The presence of these fossils at such a depth suggests that the biosphere of Earth has deep, dark roots we are only beginning to map. It forces us to ask if the life we see around us is merely the tip of a much larger subterranean pyramid. If plankton can be found 6,000 meters down, what other biological secrets are waiting in the crushing dark? The discovery sent a tremor through the scientific community, shattering the boundary between the living world and the dead stone. Every inch the drill bit descended further, the more the line between chemistry and biology seemed to blur. But as we marveled at these ancient ghosts, the Earth was preparing to show us that life was not the only thing hidden in the deep. But as we pushed deeper into the abyss, the silence of the stone was broken by a sound that defied logic. We were descending through the 7,000-meter mark when the drilling mud began to change. It was no longer a smooth industrial lubricant. It was coming back to the surface, frothing and agitated. The massive steel pipes vibrated with a rhythmic, violent pulse that we could feel in the soles of our boots. Something was screaming from the dark, but it was not a voice. It was the sound of the Earth itself exhaling. Instruments began to detect a surge of hydrogen gas that shouldn't have been there. The concentration was so high that it seemed as if we had punctured a lung, belonging to a subterranean titan. According to the official reports published by the Soviet Academy of Sciences, the mud was literally boiling with this unexpected element. Hydrogen is the lightest, most volatile building block of the universe. In the open air, it is a ghost, but trapped under kilometers of solid crystalline rock, it becomes a pressurized monster. The chief scientist of the project, Yevgeny Kozlovsky, recorded that the volume of gas was staggering. This was not a minor pocket of air trapped in a crevice. This was a continuous, roaring flow of primordial gas rising from the deep crust. The air in the drilling tower became heavy and metallic. We watched the gauges with a fear that is hard to describe to those who have never stood over an open wound in the planet. At any moment, a single spark could have turned the entire site into a pillar of fire. We were standing on the edge of a man-made volcano. The Journal of Geochemical Exploration later detailed how this hydrogen was not a remnant of organic decay. It was something much older. It was a sign of the Earth's outgassing, a process usually reserved for the cooling of a newborn planet. To see it here, 7 kilometers down, was to realize that the ground beneath us is not static. The Earth is a chemical reactor of unimaginable power. The hydrogen geyser was a warning. It told us that the further we went, the more the laws of surface geology would crumble. We were no longer just drilling a hole in the ground. We were provoking a sleeping giant that had been holding its breath for 4 billion years. And as the gas continued to bubble and hiss, we realized that the heat was only the beginning of our problems. We thought we understood the anatomy of our world. We believed that rock was the ultimate definition of solid. But as the drill bit chewed past 12,000 meters, the Earth revealed a terrifying secret. Down there, the very concept of solid begins to dissolve. The weight of the crust above is no longer a measurement. It is a physical presence that crushes the imagination. Imagine the weight of 300 Eiffel Towers pressing down on every single square inch of your body. At this depth, the pressure reaches over 100,000 pounds per square inch. The Soviet scientists, documenting their findings in the reports of the Academy of Sciences, encountered a nightmare of physics. They called it the plasticity of the abyss. I remember looking at the samples we managed to bring to the surface. They didn't look like the granite of our mountain ranges. They looked tired. They looked defeated by the weight of the world. In the upper layers, rock is brittle and stubborn. If you hit it with enough force, it shatters into 1,000 sharp shards. But at 12 kilometers down, the rules of the surface are discarded like useless trinkets. The temperature had spiked to 180 degrees Celsius. This was twice as hot as any model had predicted. In this sweltering, pressurized tomb, the granite began to behave like warm wax. It was no longer a wall to be pierced. It was a thick, viscous liquid that moved with the agonizing slowness of a glacier. Every time we pulled the drill bit up to replace a diamond tooth, the Earth would exhale. The hole we had spent years carving would begin to heal itself. The rock would literally flow back into the void we had created. It was as if the planet were a living organism, closing a wound as fast as we could cut it. The Journal of Geophysical Research later analyzed this transition zone where the crust ceases to be a shell and starts to behave like a fluid. They call it the brittle ductile transition. But to us, standing on that vibrating steel platform, it felt like we were trying to drill a hole into a nightmare. We weren't fighting stone anymore. We were fighting a substance that had the mass of a mountain and the fluidity of honey. The drill strings, miles of heavy steel, began to warp and twist like wet noodles. The deeper we went, the more the Earth seemed to swallow our tools. The friction was no longer just a mechanical challenge. It was a transformation of matter itself. We were witnessing the point where the foundation of our civilization becomes a sea of slow-moving fire. The silence of the deep was replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in our teeth. It was the sound of millions of tons of rock shifting and groaning under its own impossible mass. We realized then that the Earth is not a cold, dead stone floating in space. It is a pressurized engine of staggering power, and we were just children poking at the piston of a titan. The plasticity of the abyss was the ultimate gatekeeper. It was the barrier that told humanity, "You have gone far enough." But the human spirit is a stubborn thing, even as the rock turned to liquid, even as the heat threatened to melt our very resolve. We refused to look away, because beneath that plastic layer lay the answer to how our world was born, and what we found next would make the flowing rock seem like a minor inconvenience. The year 1982 was supposed to be our crowning moment of absolute triumph. We had breached the 12,000-meter mark, a feat never before imagined by human engineering. The world was watching as the Soviet Union pierced the very heart of the planet. Celebrations were already being prepared, and the air in the frozen Kola Peninsula was thick with the scent of victory. But the Earth is a jealous and unforgiving guardian of its deepest secrets. Beneath our feet, the fundamental laws of physics were preparing a brutal lesson in human humility. The drill string was a technological masterpiece, a miles-long umbilical cord of high-strength alloy and raw ambition. It stretched down through the dark like a silver needle stitching the surface to the abyss. Then, the vibration changed in a way that made my blood turn to ice. It was not a roar or a scream. It was a sickening hollow thud that traveled up 9 kilometers of solid steel. In a single heartbeat, the tension needles on our surface gauges dropped to absolute zero. The immense weight of 5,000 meters of pipe simply vanished from our sensors. Deep in the dark, where the crushing heat turned solid stone into something resembling taffy, the steel had reached its breaking point. The 9-kilometer snap was the sound of a dream fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. Imagine a steel cable as thick as a human torso snapping like a dry twig under the weight of a mountain. The energy released at the point of failure was equivalent to a localized earthquake. 5 kilometers of priceless, specialized equipment were now entombed in the crust forever. We stood on the vibrating platform in a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush our lungs. Records from the Russian Academy of Sciences would later classify this as a catastrophic mechanical fatigue event caused by thermal stress. But to those of us who felt the rig jump beneath our boots, it felt like the planet had bitten back. The borehole had become a vertical grave for our finest tools and years of our lives. We realized with a gut-wrenching certainty that we could not simply fish them out. The pressure at those depths had already begun to fuse the broken pipe to the walls of the hole. Our path to the center of the world was blocked by a plug of our own twisted metal. Decades of labor were suddenly severed by the sheer spite of the subterranean environment. The command came down from the leadership with the weight of a funeral sentence. We were forced to do the unthinkable and abandon the deepest section of the well. The team was ordered to retreat all the way back to the 7,000-meter mark. We had to start over, carving a new, agonizingly slow path around the steel ghost we left behind. The journey had shifted from a scientific expedition into a desperate war of attrition. And as we began to drill anew, we wondered if the Earth was merely toyed with us before the next strike. The borehole had evolved into something more than a mere puncture in the skin of our world. It was now the largest ear ever built by human hands. The Soviet Academy of Sciences realized that this 12,000-meter shaft was a direct line to the heart of the machine. We were no longer just drilling. We were listening to the seismic secrets of the entire planet. Before this moment, our understanding of the Earth's interior was based on guesswork and filtered echoes. We relied on seismic waves traveling from thousands of kilometers away, like trying to hear a whisper through a thick, dark forest. But with the Kola borehole, we were finally inside the forest. Scientists from the Russian Academy of Sciences discovered that the speed of sound through these deep rocks defied every textbook in existence. The legendary Conrad discontinuity, the boundary where granite was supposed to turn into basalt, simply vanished into thin air. It was a ghost in our instruments, a monumental misinterpretation of how pressure and heat manipulate sound. We used the hole to calibrate the seismic sensors of every major monitoring station on the globe. Think of it as a master tuning fork for a planetary orchestra. We dropped specialized sensors into the abyss to measure how the Earth breathes and shudders in real time. Every atomic test, every tectonic shift, and every distant tremor was now being felt with terrifying precision. Records from the Soviet Academy confirmed that the crust was more saturated with fluid and fractured than we ever dared to dream. This was no longer just geology. It was a clinical diagnostic of the living, breathing rock beneath our boots. The world's seismic maps were being redrawn in the absolute dark of that narrow shaft. The sheer scale of our previous scientific era was humbling and profound. we found that seismic waves did not just bounce off layers, they were distorted by secrets we had not yet named. Every seismic station from Moscow to Washington suddenly had to recalibrate their vision based on our findings. The whole was forcing the world to see the Earth for what it truly is. It is not a solid, predictable sphere, but a complex and vibrating labyrinth of stress and release. The Russian Academy of Sciences transformed our mechanical struggle into a global lens of discovery. We were no longer just observers of the surface. We were now plugged directly into the nervous system of the planet. The silence of the depths was actually a deafening roar of raw information. 12 kilometers down, the rock was speaking a language of frequency and vibration. And for the first time in human history, we were finally beginning to translate the dialogue of the crust. The Earth was no longer an impenetrable mystery. It was becoming a readable data set. But the deeper we listened, the more we realized how little we truly understood about the ground we stand upon. Every textbook we carried to the edge of the Arctic Circle was a lie. We had calculated the geothermal gradient with the cold precision of a mathematician. The world's leading geologists at the Soviet Academy of Sciences predicted a steady climb. For every 100 meters we descended, the temperature should have risen by 1 single degree. It was a comfortable, predictable equation, written in the safety of a university office. By the time the drill reached 12,000 meters, our models promised us a manageable 100 degrees Celsius. Water would boil, but our steel and diamonds would remain defiant. But the Earth does not care for human projections or academic consensus. As the drill bit chewed through the final layers of the Proterozoic rock, the sensors began to scream a different story. The heat did not just rise, it surged like a fever in a dying god. At 12,262 meters, the reality hit us like a physical blow. The mercury didn't stop at 100. It climbed past 140, then 160, finally settling at a blistering 180 degrees Celsius. This was nearly double the temperature every scientific model in existence had forecasted. It was the heat gradient anomaly, a thermal betrayal that defied 40 years of geological theory. I stood in the control room, watching the digital readouts flicker with impossible data. The heat was no longer a measurement. It was an invisible wall, a subterranean sun that we had accidentally provoked. Our drilling mud, the lifeblood of the operation, began to behave like boiling thin soup. The viscosity failed, and the pressure within the hole became a chaotic, unpredictable beast. In the deep, the very physics of stone began to shift. The granite was no longer the brittle, unyielding shield we had encountered near the surface. Under that extreme, unforeseen heat, the rock reached its plasticity point. It was behaving like wet clay or warm plastic, closing in around the drill string as soon as we tried to pull back. We were trying to drill through a medium that flowed back into the hole like a healing wound. The sheer volume of heat energy radiating from the core was far more intense than any previous mission had reported to the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program. This was not just a technical failure. It was a fundamental awakening to how little we know about the planet's internal furnace. The Earth was holding onto a reservoir of primordial heat that should have cooled eons ago, according to the cooling models of the 20th century. We were witnessing the deep Earth heat paradox in real time, documented later by researchers at the Kola Science Center. The machinery, forged from the strongest alloys known to man, began to lose its structural integrity. We realized then that we weren't just exploring a hole. We were poking a finger into a furnace that was never meant to be opened. 1989 was the year the world above began to change forever. But 12 kilometers below the Arctic permafrost, time had long since frozen into a singular, crushing moment. We pushed the Uralmash 15,000 rig to its absolute breaking point. The steel cables, miles long, stretched like the tendons of a dying giant under the weight of the drill string. 12,262 meters. Think about that number until your breath catches in your throat. If you dropped a stone from that height, it would fall for minutes through a vacuum of lightless stone. We had surpassed the depth of the Mariana Trench, the deepest scar on the ocean floor. We had gone deeper into the planetary crust than any biological entity in the history of the solar system. I remember the vibration in the floor of the derrick, a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate within my own marrow. It was the sound of the earth resisting. According to the records at the Kola Science Center, the pressure at this depth exceeded 1,000 atmospheres. Every square inch of our equipment was being squeezed by the weight of an entire mountain range. The scientists from the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program watched the seismic monitors with disbelief. We were no longer just drilling, we were trespassing. At 12,000 meters, the rock wasn't just hot, it was alive with tectonic tension. We heard cracks that sounded like artillery fire echoing up the borehole. They weren't the voices of the damned, as the urban legends later claimed. They were the screams of ancient crystalline structures shattering under human intrusion. The air in the control room was thick with the scent of burnt ozone and hydraulic fluid. We had reached the pinnacle of Soviet engineering, a monument of steel and sweat. But as the bit ground into that final meter, a collective realization settled over the team. The deeper we went, the more the Earth seemed to lose its familiar solid nature. The data coming back wasn't just strange, it was haunting. We had expected a transition to basaltic rock, a clean line in the geological history books. Instead, we found fractured, water-saturated stone where science said no water could exist. The crust was porous, weeping ancient fluids like an open wound at the bottom of the world. We were staring into a dark mirror of our own ignorance. 12,262 meters was not just a record. It was the limit of the human will against the physics of a planet that wanted to stay hidden. The calculations of the Soviet Academy of Sciences were precise on paper. But the Earth does not acknowledge human mathematics. We had reached the threshold of the impossible, a thermal barrier that defied every geological model we possessed. 180 degrees Celsius. Think about that number. Nearly double the heat required to boil the very oceans above us. The Kola Science Center records describe this as the moment the mission shifted from exploration to a desperate war against physics. I stood by the cooling pumps, watching the gauges tremble. The machinery was screaming in a pitch that no man should ever hear. It was the sound of metal surrendering its soul. At this depth, the pressure and heat create a state of matter that feels alien. The granite was no longer a brittle, defiant enemy. Under the weight of miles of crust, it had become ductile. It behaved like hot, viscous plastic. We were trying to drill into a sponge of fire. The drill bits, forged from the toughest tungsten carbide known to man, were failing. They did not just break, they transformed. They returned to the surface as twisted, glowing lumps of useless putty. The International Continental Scientific Drilling Program later noted that the temperature gradient was twice as steep as predicted. Nature had hidden a furnace beneath the permafrost. Every foot we gained felt like an assault on a living organism. The planet was running a fever, a localized, intense heat that seemed designed to repel our intrusion. We were no longer the masters of technology. We were children playing with a needle against the hide of a sleeping titan. The air in the derrick smelled of scorched oil and the metallic tang of overheated steel. We looked at the data and saw the end of the road. The 180-degree wall was not an obstacle. It was a boundary set by the planet itself. Our tools, designed for the cold logic of the surface, were melting in the grip of the deep. The deeper we pushed, the more the rock fought back with silent, radiating fury. It was the thermal wall, a place where the rules of solid matter began to dissolve. Beyond this point, the Earth was no longer a stone. It was a living, breathing pressure cooker. We stared at the monitors as the drill bit stopped turning. The friction of the turn was being swallowed by the softness of the stone. In that moment, we realized that we had reached the limit of the machine age. The heat was the ultimate gatekeeper of the underworld, 180 degrees of defiance. The records at the Kola Science Center remain as a testament to this heat. It was the point where the Earth said no more. The dream of reaching 15,000 meters was dying in the furnace of the crust. We were standing on the edge of a vertical abyss, looking into a fire we could not extinguish. The silence that followed the drill's failure was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a species realizing its own fragility. We had the will, but the Earth had the energy, and the energy was winning. The mission was entering its final, agonizing stage. The 180-degree barrier was the end of our journey into the dark. The silence at 12,262 meters was absolute. But as the Soviet Union began to fracture in the late 1980s, a different kind of noise began to leak through the Iron Curtain. It was a story that would bypass scientific journals and infect the global consciousness. The legend of the well to hell was born in the shadows of the Arctic Circle. A narrative emerged claiming that we had not just found rock, but the gateway to an eternal furnace. The report alleged that researchers lowered a heat-resistant microphone into the abyss. It claimed that instead of the shifting of tectonic plates, we heard the synchronized wailing of millions of tormented souls. I remember the way the story spread, like a viral fever through the pre-internet world. It was first published by a small Finnish newspaper called Amenusastia. From there, it was picked up by American religious broadcasters who presented it as empirical proof of the afterlife. But the official scientific record from the Kola Science Center of the Russian Academy of Sciences tells a very different story. In the real world, the laws of physics are far more brutal than the folklore of the supernatural. There was no microphone in 1989 capable of surviving the conditions at the bottom of the SG3 borehole. At those depths, the pressure is over 1,000 times greater than at sea level. The temperature of 180 degrees Celsius would have melted the delicate diaphragms of any recording device known to man. David Guberman, the director of the Kola project, spent years debunking this fabrication. He often remarked that the screams were a clever construction of audio loops and echoes. The actual audio used in the infamous hoax was later identified by sound engineers as a layered track from the 1972 horror film Barren Blood. Yet, the myth persists because the human mind abhors a vacuum. We could not accept that after decades of drilling, we found only silent, crushed rock. We wanted there to be a monster in the dark. We wanted the abyss to have a voice. The official records at the Kola Science Center remain purely geological. There are charts of seismic waves, mineral densities, and thermal gradients. There is no mention of voices. There is no record of a microphone being sacrificed to the heat. The sounds of hell were a human invention designed to fill the terrifying silence of the deep earth. The truth is that the only thing screaming at 12 kilometers was the machinery, the high-pitched whine of the drill bit as it struggled against the plastic flow of the stone, the groan of the steel cables under the weight of miles of pipe. The real horror was not a supernatural pit. It was the realization that we were standing over a silent, indifferent planet, a world that did not care about our myths or our fears. The Kola project proved that the Earth is not a hollow chamber of echoes. It is a solid, crushing weight that extends far beyond our reach. When we look at the data from the Russian Academy of Sciences, we see the death of an urban legend. We see the triumph of cold, hard evidence over the instinct to fear the dark. But even today, when the wind howls across the abandoned ruins of the Kola site, people still whisper. They whisper because they prefer the idea of a hell they can understand to a geology they cannot control. The silence of the borehole is the ultimate debunking. It is the sound of 12,000 meters of ancient, uninhabited history. We did not find the gates of the underworld. We found the limit of our own technological arrogance. The legend was a ghost, but the pressure was real. The screams were a lie, but the heat was an absolute truth. In the Chronicles of the Earth, the Kola hoax is a reminder of our fragility. We are a species that tells stories to hide from the emptiness of the void. But the void at the bottom of the hole does not need a story. It simply exists, heavy and dark and deafeningly quiet. We expected to find a tomb of solid granite. 12 kilometers beneath our feet, the weight of the world is a crushing, absolute force. The pressure at that depth exceeds 1,000 times the pressure at the surface. Science told us that no crack could survive such a burden. The textbooks of the 20th century described a deep crust that was a singular, impenetrable mass of dense stone. But as the drill bit chewed through the Precambrian rock, the data began to scream a different truth. The International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, or ICDP, confirmed a geological impossibility. The deep earth was not a solid block of dead matter. It was fractured. It was porous. It was a labyrinth of broken stone that should have been fused shut by the weight of the mountains above. This is the porosity paradox. At 12,000 meters, the granite was riddled with microscopic fissures and voids. The rock was breathing in a way we never thought possible. We found ourselves staring at a mystery that challenged our understanding of the planet's architecture. How could a structure remain open under the weight of 12 kilometers of solid overhead crust? The answer arrived in the form of a strange mineral-rich brine, water. Not the water of the oceans, but a primordial, trapped fluid that defied every model of planetary formation. According to the records of the Russian Academy of Sciences, this water was not supposed to be there. It was squeezed out of the minerals themselves by the sheer intensity of the heat and pressure. This liquid had nowhere to go, so it migrated through the rock, forcing the fractures to stay open like a hydraulic jack. The deep crust was not a dry, static basement. It was a saturated, broken wilderness. The rock was so shattered that it had the consistency of a sponge made of stone. This discovery sent shockwaves through the global scientific community. If the crust is porous at these depths, our models for how heat moves through the Earth are fundamentally broken. We realized that we are walking upon a planet that is far more fragile and complex than we dared to imagine. The solidity we feel under our boots is a lie of the surface. Deep down, the Earth is a shattered relic, held together by pressure, but riddled with the ghosts of ancient fluids. The porosity paradox taught us that even the most solid foundations are, in reality, a delicate web of cracks. I held a fragment of the deep earth in my palm. It felt cold, despite the hellish temperatures it had recently called home. 12,000 meters of crushing pressure had forged this silicate bone. But as the laboratory lights hit the surface, the Soviet scientists realized they were not just looking at the past of our world. They were looking at the face of a celestial neighbor. At that moment, the Kola Superdeep Borehole became a bridge between the abyss and the cosmos. The Soviet Academy of Sciences began a procedure that seemed like madness. They placed the rock samples from the depths of the hole side by side with the lunar soil. These were the precious grains of regolith brought back by the robotic hands of the Luna 16, 20, and 24 probes. The world had always viewed the moon as a silver stranger, a cold, distant watcher that shared nothing with the fertile mud of our fields. But the chemical fingerprints told a story of a violent, shared bloodline. The analysis revealed a composition that was virtually identical. The minerals from the deep crust of the Kola Peninsula were a chemical mirror of the lunar highlands. According to reports from the Russian Academy of Sciences and subsequent comparisons with NASA's Apollo data, the match was impossible to ignore. This was the moment the giant impact hypothesis moved from a whisper to a scream. 4,500,000,000 years ago, a rogue planet the size of Mars, named Theia, slammed into the proto-Earth. The impact was so catastrophic that it turned the entire planet into a sea of liquid fire. A massive portion of our world's crust and mantle was ripped away and hurled into the freezing void of space. That debris did not vanish. It coalesced under the grip of gravity to form the moon. Standing in that lab, the scientists realized they were holding two halves of a broken heart. The moon is not a captured asteroid or a stray wanderer. The moon is a piece of the very ground we stand on, exiled to the stars by an ancient apocalypse. The rocks from the Kola borehole were the deep-seated remnants of that original primordial Earth. They are the cousins of the lunar dust. This discovery creates a sensation of profound cosmic vertigo. It means that when you look up at the night sky, you are looking at a mirror. The silver light of the moon is the reflection of our own ancient self, staring back at us across the vacuum. We are walking on the stump of a limb that was severed 4 billion years ago. The Earth and its moon are a single shattered organism, bound forever by the memory of a collision that nearly ended everything. The dream of the Soviet scientists was not merely to break a world record. They were hunting for the Moho, the Mohorovičić discontinuity, named after the visionary Croatian seismologist Andrija Mohorovičić. This is the ultimate border of our existence. It is the invisible, jagged line where the rigid crust of our world finally gives way. Beyond it lies the mantle, a vast, churning kingdom of silicate rock that behaves like a slow-moving liquid. If the Earth is a living organism, the Moho is the inner lining of its skin. For a century, we have only known this place through echoes and shadows. We watched how seismic waves from earthquakes suddenly accelerated when they hit this transition zone. The rocks there become denser, the chemistry changes, the rules of physics begin to warp under the weight of an entire world. The Soviet team believed the Moho was within their reach. Based on early seismic surveys, they estimated the crust in the Kola region was thin. They expected to pierce the gateway at 15 kilometers. They were fueled by a dangerous scientific hubris. But as the drill bit chewed deeper into the Precambrian rock, the reality became a nightmare. According to the technical reports from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Earth did not behave like a static map. The deeper they went, the more the planet fought back. The Moho was not 15 kilometers away. Modern deep crustal studies now confirm that in the Baltic Shield, the crust is massive. The true frontier was 35 kilometers down. Think of the weight of that realization. 35,000 meters of crushing ancient granite. When the drill finally stopped at 12,262 meters, the team was paralyzed. They had spent 2 decades fighting for every inch, and they were not even halfway to their goal. The abyss was not just deeper than they thought, it was angrier. The heat was the first sign of the gatekeeper's presence. At 12 kilometers, the theoretical models predicted a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius. Instead, the sensors recorded a blistering 180 degrees. That is 356 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a temperature that melts the confidence of the strongest steel. But it wasn't just the heat that broke the mission. It was the state of the matter itself. The rock at the bottom was no longer a solid, brittle obstacle. Under the staggering pressure of thousands of atmospheres, the stone had become plastic. It behaved more like warm taffy or thick mud than granite. Whenever they tried to withdraw the drill string to change a bit, the hole would begin to flow. The earth was literally swallowing the wound they had carved into it. I can almost feel the vibration of the drill pipe, thousands of meters long, twisting like a wet noodle. The sounds coming from the depths were described as a low, rhythmic grinding, as if the planet itself were breathing. The Moho remained a ghost, protected by the laws of thermodynamics and the sheer scale of the crust. We wanted to touch the furnace of the world, but the Earth reminded us that we are merely guests on its surface. The Moho is the ultimate no trespassing sign. It is a frontier that guards the secrets of how our planet recycles its soul. The Soviets had run out of technology, and more importantly, they had run out of time. They stood at the 12-kilometer mark, staring into a darkness that refused to be conquered. They had reached the limit of human ambition, and the mantle remained a silent, burning mystery, miles beneath their feet. The year was 1991, and a different kind of pressure began to fracture the foundation. While the drill bit sat idle at 12,000 meters, the empire that birthed it was disintegrating. Geopolitics are often like tectonic plates, slow, invisible movements that eventually lead to a catastrophic shift. The Soviet Union, once a monolith of centralized ambition, was vanishing into the pages of history. At the Zapolyarny site, the scientists felt the tremor of this collapse before they heard the news. Funding, the lifeblood of any expedition into the unknown, simply evaporated. The high-tech laboratories and the massive drilling rig became expensive relics of a nation that no longer existed. By 1992, the order came to cease all drilling operations. The screaming machinery that had defied the Earth for 20 years finally went cold. The silence that followed was more haunting than the grinding of the steel. It was the silence of a dream dying under its own weight. I look at the records from the Geological Institute of Russia, and I see a story of desperate survival. The staff went from charting the secrets of the crust to wondering where their next meal would come from. The Russian Academy of Sciences struggled to maintain the site, but the Arctic is a cruel landlord. In 1995, the facility was officially decommissioned. The scientists, the engineers, and the dreamers were told to pack their bags and leave the abyss behind. They left behind specialized equipment that had cost millions of rubles. They left behind core samples that held the biography of our planet. But most importantly, they left a hole that led straight into the dark. Today, the Zapolyarny site is a ghost. The massive steel tower that once dominated the horizon has been dismantled for scrap. The surrounding buildings are hollow shells, their windows shattered by the unrelenting Kola winds. Rust, the slow-motion fire of chemistry, is devouring the remains of the Soviet ambition. Walking through the ruins, you can almost smell the ozone and the heavy grease of the past. You can feel the ghost of the 1970s, when this was the center of the geological universe. In the center of a concrete floor, surrounded by debris, sits a modest metal cap. It is heavy, rusted, and secured by a circle of thick industrial bolts. Underneath that cap lies a shaft 12,262 meters deep. According to the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, it remains the deepest man-made point on land. Yet, it is now guarded only by the freezing fog and the occasional stray animal. The world's most profound wound has been stitched shut with a piece of scrap metal. It is a monument to what happens when human curiosity outpaces human stability. The earth has a way of waiting us out. The facility decays, the empire is gone, but the whole remains. A silent, vertical scar through the heart of the ancient granite, waiting for a future that may never have the courage to open it again. The rusted cap on the surface is a lie. It suggests a cold, silent grave. But beneath that 12,000-meter seal, the earth is screaming with energy. As the Soviet drill bit ground its way past the 7-kilometer mark, the team hit a wall of heat they never saw coming. Standard geological models predicted a stable, predictable gradient. They expected the temperature at the bottom to reach a manageable 100 degrees Celsius. Instead, they were met with a staggering 180 degrees. The rock was no longer behaving like a solid. It was beginning to flow like plastic under the weight of its own thermal burden. The scientists realized they were not just drilling into a planet. They were drilling into a massive, subterranean nuclear furnace. The source of this unexpected hell was not the molten core far below. It was the very rock they were passing through. According to records from the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, the crust here was saturated with heat-producing isotopes. Deep within the ancient granite of the Baltic Shield, a silent, invisible war was being waged at the atomic level. Concentrations of uranium-238 and thorium-232 were far higher than anyone had dared to estimate. These are the heavy, unstable titans of the periodic table. They have been trapped in the crystalline matrix of the crust for billions of years. As these atoms decay, they undergo a violent transformation. They shed alpha particles and release kinetic energy that has nowhere to go. Every single decay event is a microscopic explosion. When you multiply those trillions of tiny explosions by the vast volume of the continental crust, you get a planetary scale heater. I look at the data and I see a world that is still cooking itself from the inside out. The granite was acting like a thermal blanket, trapping the energy of primordial supernovas within its grip. The engineers were literally fighting the radioactive leftovers of the stars that died before our sun was even born. The heat was so intense it began to compromise the chemical integrity of their drilling fluids. The heavy lubricants, designed for extreme conditions, started to break down into a thin, useless, watery mist. Imagine the sound of that drill bit miles below, screaming as it encountered rock that felt like hot taffy. The vibration would have traveled up the drill string like a rhythmic metallic heartbeat. It was the sound of the earth pushing back. Geologists from the Russian Academy of Sciences noted that this radiogenic heat was the primary reason the project hit a thermal dead end. The concentration of thorium alone was enough to turn the deep crust into a slow-motion kiln. We often think of radioactivity as a human-made terror, a ghost of Chernobyl or Hiroshima. But the truth is much more haunting. The ground you walk on is a nuclear graveyard. The very foundation of our continents is powered by the same physics that fuels a warhead. The Kola Superdeep Borehole didn't just find heat. It found the Earth's engine room, an engine fueled by heavy metals and deep-time decay. The scientists had to accept a humbling reality. Man can build a machine to pierce the skin of the world, but we are not yet strong enough to survive the fire that keeps the world alive. The deep crust is not just stone. It is a glowing, radioactive tomb of ancient energy. And it was that very energy that finally melted the Soviet dream of reaching the mantle. They were defeated by the atomic ghost of the planet itself. The ruins of the Kola Superdeep Borehole stand as a silent monument to a failure that changed the world. But look past the rusted metal and the welded hatch. The ghost of that Soviet ambition now breathes within every modern oil rig and deep-sea platform. The engineers at Kola discovered that a drill string 12,000 meters long does not behave like a rigid tool. It behaves like a piece of wet string. They had to learn how to guide a needle through a haystack while the needle was melting. At those depths, the weight of the steel pipe itself is enough to snap it like glass. This forced the creation of the turbo drill. Instead of rotating the entire 7 miles of pipe from the surface, they sent the power to the bottom. They used the flow of drilling mud to spin a turbine right at the rock face. I have seen this same principle used today to pierce the salt layers of the Atlantic Ocean. Companies like Petrobras and ExxonMobil stand on the shoulders of those Soviet giants. The Russian Academy of Sciences documented every vibration and every catastrophic failure of those bits. They learned that at extreme pressure, fluids do not act like liquids, they act like alien substances. This data became the blueprint for modern measurement while drilling technology. Today, we can steer a drill bit with the precision of a surgeon, miles beneath the waves. We do this because Kola showed us exactly what happens when you lose control. The whip effect, where the drill pipe lashes out and destroys the borehole, was first mastered in the Arctic tundra. Now, that mastery allows us to tap into the pre-salt oil reserves of Brazil, hidden under miles of water and rock. The International Ocean Discovery Program still references the thermal limits found at Kola. They taught us how to cool a machine that is being cooked by the planet's internal furnace. Without the expensive, grueling lessons of the 1980s, we would be blind in the deep crust. The technology used to reach the deep water horizon, or the Z-44 Chaivo, well owes its life to the Kola failure. It is a strange irony of human progress. We failed to reach the mantle, but we learned how to harvest the blood of the earth. The engineering legacy of that hole is not just about depth, it is about the resilience of the human mind when faced with an immovable wall of stone. The sensors we use today to detect seismic shifts were forged in the hellish heat of that 12-kilometer pit. We took the scars of the Kola project and turned them into the armor for modern industry. But even with our sophisticated sensors and diamond-tipped bits, a chilling question remains. If we use their lessons to go even deeper, what happens when we find something the Soviets were too afraid to name? The legacy is not just the tools we built, but the warning they left behind. Some depths were never meant to be breached. Beyond the mechanical failure and the broken drill bits, a far more chilling reality emerged from the depths of the Kola Peninsula. Scientists from the Cambridge University Department of Earth Sciences began to analyze the core samples brought up from the abyss. What they held in their hands was not just stone. It was a fragment of the Earth's original skeleton. They were looking at the Baltic Shield, a massive, rigid slab of the Earth's crust that forms the nucleus of Northern Europe. Before this project, the true age of this deep foundation was a subject of academic debate. But the radioactive isotopes trapped within those samples told a story that defied human comprehension. The laboratory results confirmed that these rocks dated back 2.7 billion years. Try to visualize that span of time. When this rock was forged, the Earth was a violent, alien world of toxic gases and boiling oceans. Multicellular life did not exist. The very air would have dissolved your lungs in seconds. This is the North European craton, the immovable anchor upon which entire civilizations now sleep. It has survived the collision of continents and the birth and death of entire mountain ranges. I have stood in the presence of these samples, and the sensation is one of absolute insignificance. You are touching something that was already ancient when the first dinosaur took its first breath. The Baltic Shield is a silent witness to 2.7 billion years of planetary chaos. It is a testament to the sheer resilience of our world. While we worry about the passing of decades, this stone measures time in eons. The Cambridge researchers realized that the further down the Soviets drilled, the further back in time they traveled. Every meter of progress was a leap through millions of years of geological history. At 12,000 meters, they were touching the very dawn of the planet's solid surface. The heat they encountered was not just thermal energy, it was the lingering ghost of the Earth's violent birth. This rock is so dense, so compressed by the weight of the world that it vibrates with a frequency we can barely measure. It is the shield for a reason. It protects the softer layers above from the churning molten hell of the mantle below. But as we pulled these pieces of the Archean eon into the sunlight, we realized something unsettling. We were desecrating a tomb that had been sealed since the beginning of time. 2.7 billion years of silence had been shattered by a diamond-tipped needle. The deeper we look into the Baltic Shield, the more we realize that the Earth does not belong to us. We are merely a thin, fragile layer of dust resting on top of a titan that has seen the stars themselves change position. The deeper we went, the more we realized that pressure is a silent, crushing deity. At 12,000 meters, the weight of the world is not a metaphor. It is a physical force that compresses atoms until they can no longer scream. The Soviet scientists at the Kola Superdeep Borehole encountered a phenomenon that defied their every expectation of solid stone. When these core samples were finally wrenched from their lightless cradle, something terrifying happened. As the drill bit ascended and the lithostatic pressure vanished, the rocks began to moan. I have seen the technical records of these samples literally puffing up, like a sponge in slow motion. This is the violent reality of the micropressure environment. Imagine a piece of crystalline granite held under the weight of 3,000 atmospheres for eons. Suddenly, in a matter of mere hours, that suffocating weight is gone. The internal stress within the mineral structure becomes a kinetic bomb waiting for a reason to detonate. Documented reports from the Soviet Academy of Sciences describe rocks that would crack and shatter spontaneously upon reaching the surface. They were witnessing a geological version of the bends, the lethal decompression sickness that kills deep-sea divers. The very fabric of the stone was tearing itself apart from the inside out. What was once a dense, impenetrable anchor became a fragile, porous ghost of its former self. It was as if the earth was punishing us for our intrusion. By dragging these ancient secrets into the thin air of the surface, we were destroying the very evidence we sought to preserve. The stone would expand by several percentage points in volume, a microscopic explosion of the crystalline lattice. Researchers could hear the faint, metallic snaps as the bonds between molecules surrendered to the vacuum of our world. Geologists from the Russian Academy of Sciences noted that some samples became so brittle they could be crushed by a human hand. This was the planet's final involuntary defense mechanism. It was a visceral warning that some things are meant to remain under the crushing embrace of the crust. The release of such immense pressure is never a quiet or peaceful event. It is a chaotic, physical rebellion against the sudden absence of gravity's heavy hand. We were looking at a geological corpse that had died from the sheer shock of freedom. Every jagged crack in the surface of that granite was a scar earned during its vertical journey. The sterile silence of the laboratory was broken by the sound of ancient history disintegrating. We had stolen the rock from the depths, but we could not steal its strength. Without the crushing weight of 7 miles of earth to hold it together, the most resilient material on the planet became as weak as dry ash. This is the fundamental paradox of the deep. To touch the truth, we must watch it shatter in our hands. The diamond-tipped steel bit did more than cut through rock. It acted as a scalpel slicing through the skin of time itself. Every single meter we descended into the Kola Peninsula was a voyage back through the history of existence. We often think of time as a linear river flowing forward, but beneath our feet, time is a vertical stack of frozen moments. To move down 12 kilometers is to commit an act of geological heresy. It is to reject the fleeting present and dive headlong into the deep past. At the surface, we stand on the thin, fragile crust of the modern world. But 7 miles down, we were touching the foundation of the planet as it existed billions of years ago. The Russian Academy of Sciences recorded that the drill had penetrated rocks from the Proterozoic and Archean eons. This was not just stone. It was the original architecture of the Earth. Some of these formations had not seen the light of the sun for over 2 billion years. Try to visualize the scale of that silence. 2 billion years of absolute, crushing darkness. When these rocks were formed, the atmosphere of our planet was a toxic cocktail of methane and ammonia. Multicellular life did not exist. The continents we recognize today were not even a distant dream. as the drill chewed through the crust. We were moving past the extinction of the dinosaurs in the first few seconds. We flew past the birth of the first forests and the first amphibians. By the time the borehole reached its midpoint, we were in a world before the great oxygenation event. The geologists at the site, led by Yevgeny Kozlovsky, reported a discovery that defied logic. Deep within the 2-billion-year-old Precambrian layers, they found microscopic fossils. 14 species of fossilized single-celled marine plants were recovered from depths of nearly 7 kilometers. These were the ghosts of the primordial ocean, preserved in a tomb of granite. The sheer pressure of the earth had kept these delicate structures intact while the world above burned and froze 1,000 times over. It was a staggering realization that life had a foothold on this planet far earlier than we ever dared to imagine. We were looking at the survivors of a world that was alien to us. The heat at those depths reached 180 degrees Celsius. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and ancient gases trapped in the mineral lattice. Every breath the researchers took at the surface was fueled by the oxygen these ancient organisms helped create. We were intruders in a temple of deep time. The deeper we went, the more the present felt like a thin, insignificant veil. We are nothing more than a momentary flicker on the surface of a 4-billion-year-old titan. The Kola Superdeep Borehole proved that the ground is not solid. It is a library where every page is 1,000,000 years thick. And we had only just begun to read the first chapter of the abyss. The weight of those 12 kilometers was not just the weight of rock. It was the suffocating weight of eternity pressing against the steel of our ambition. To look down that hole was to look into the eyes of the beginning of everything. And the deeper we looked, the more we realized how little we truly knew about the ground that holds us. The journey was a reminder that we are guests on a planet that has a memory far longer than our own. We traveled back 2 billion years and found that the Earth never forgets its origins. The silence of the deep is the sound of time itself holding its breath. The Soviet Union did not stand alone in its obsession with the abyss. While the Kola project clawed through the ancient granite of the north, other nations began to probe the Earth's skin. They sought to answer a terrifying question. Is the ground beneath our feet the same everywhere, or is the planet a fractured mosaic of secrets? In the late 1980s, West Germany launched its own assault on the deep. The Kontinentales Tiefbohr program, or KTB, was born in the forests of Bavaria. This was not just a hole. It was a masterpiece of Teutonic engineering. Where the Russians used brute force, the Germans used surgical precision. They drilled 9,101 meters into the Earth's crust. I remember looking at the data from the Windischeschenbach site and feeling a sense of dread. The German scientists expected a predictable increase in temperature. They were wrong. The heat at 9 kilometers surged to 265 degrees Celsius. It was a furnace that defied every mathematical model they possessed. The rock was not solid. It was saturated with hot, brined fluids under impossible pressure. The Earth was bleeding hot salt water from veins that should have been crushed shut. Source: GFZ German Research Center for Geosciences. While Germany faced the fire, Japan turned its eyes to the dark water. The deep-sea drilling vessel Chikyu is a titan of the modern age. Operated by JAMSTEC, this ship is designed to do what Kola could never achieve. It aims to pierce the oceanic crust and touch the mantle itself. The crust under the ocean is thin, a mere 5 to 10 kilometers thick, but it is a realm of violence and shifting plates. The Chikyu drills into the Nankai Trough, a place where the floor of the world is being swallowed by the fire below. They are hunting for the moho, the boundary where the crust ends and the mantle begins. Every comparison tells a different story of a planet that refuses to be categorized. Kola showed us the ancient frozen history of a stable continent. The KTB revealed a world of boiling fluids and unexpected heat in the heart of Europe. The Chikyu shows us the grinding teeth of the tectonic machines that cause tsunamis and death. We realize that the Earth is not a uniform ball of stone. It is a living, breathing, and wildly inconsistent organism. Regional differences are not just geological footnotes. They are the reason why one city stands still while another is swallowed by an earthquake. The deeper we go, the more the planet feels like a labyrinth with no map. We are blind men touching different parts of a great beast. One touches the cold, hard scale of the north, another touches the burning, fluid heart of the west, a third touches the trembling, submerged limb of the east. None of us see the whole picture. We only know that the more we drill, the more the earth warns us to stay away. The silence of the abyss is not empty. It is the sound of 1 billion years of pressure waiting for a way out. Source: International Ocean Discovery Program and the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program. We are learning that the ground is a lie. The stability we feel is a fleeting gift from a titan that is constantly shifting beneath us. From the frozen tundra to the Bavarian woods to the crushing depths of the Pacific, the Earth remains the ultimate, impenetrable fortress. 12,262 meters is a distance that breaks human machinery. It is a depth that liquefies our pride and turns our hardest alloys into wet noodles. To a human being standing at the edge of the borehole, it feels like an eternity of darkness. But I need you to step back from the drill site and look at the blue marble from space. From that distance, our greatest achievement in the history of subterranean exploration vanishes completely. It is a microscopic pinprick on the hide of a titan. The Earth is roughly 12,742 kilometers wide. Our deepest hole is a mere 12 kilometers deep. When we do the math, a terrifying realization begins to settle in the back of the mind. We have only penetrated 0.1% of the way to the center of our world. If the Earth were a standard gala apple, we have not even pierced through the outer skin. We are parasites crawling on the surface of a fruit, claiming we have reached the core when we have only scratched the wax. The United States Geological Survey tells us the crust beneath our feet ranges from 5 to 70 kilometers thick. At Kola, we thought we were entering the heart of the beast. In reality, we were barely tickling its ribs. Beneath that 12-kilometer mark lies nearly 6,400 kilometers of solid and molten mystery. There are layers of rock so dense they defy our understanding of chemistry. There are oceans of liquid iron swirling in a dance that generates the magnetic shield protecting us from solar death. Everything we know, every city we built, every war we fought, happens on this thin, fragile eggshell. We live on a crust that is proportionally thinner than the shell of a chicken egg. It is a sobering, almost suffocating perspective. The ground we call solid is a floating raft on a sea of fire and pressure. I look at the data from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and I feel a sense of vertigo. We spent 20 years and billions of rubles to move the needle by a fraction of a millimeter on the planetary scale. The Earth is not just a planet, it is an impenetrable fortress of volume. We are like ants trying to drill through the hull of a nuclear aircraft carrier with a needle. We celebrate our 12 kilometers because the heat forced us to stop. The planet did not even notice we were there. It remained silent, massive, and indifferent to our desperate prying. Source: United States Geological Survey and NASA Earth Observatory. We have not conquered the depths. We have only learned how vast our ignorance truly is. The planetary eggshell is all that protects us from the primordial furnace, and we are still, quite literally, just scratching the surface. I stand on the surface of a world I do not truly know. Beneath my boots lies a kingdom of shadows and crushing weight that no human eye will ever witness. We have mapped the craters of the Moon and the dusty plains of Mars with surgical precision. Yet, we are effectively blind to the colossal machinery grinding beneath our own feet. The Soviet journey to 12,000 meters was a monument to our ambition, but it was also a testament to our limitations. Science tells us that the Earth's radius is approximately 6,371 kilometers. We have only breached the first 12. The remaining 99.9% of our planet is a gargantuan, silent frontier. It is a realm where the laws of physics as we know them begin to warp and buckle under the weight of a world. According to the California Institute of Technology, we are forced to see this interior through a glass darkly. We do not use light. We use the screams of the planet itself. Whenever the crust snaps and an earthquake ripples through the globe, we listen to the echoes. This is seismic tomography, our only flashlight in a pitch-black basement. The Seismological Society of America reveals that these waves travel at different speeds depending on what they hit. Through this, we have discovered that the mantle is not a simple, stagnant rock. It is a slow-motion ocean of silicate, churning over millions of years. It is a thick, viscous beast that carries our continents like rafts on a cooling lake of lava. Deep within this mantle, at the boundary where rock meets the outer core, lie the blobs. Geologists call them large low-shear velocity provinces. One sits beneath Africa and another beneath the Pacific Ocean. They are mountainous structures, thousands of kilometers wide and hundreds of kilometers tall. They are larger than Mount Everest by a factor of hundreds. Some scientists at Arizona State University suggest these might be the ancient remains of Theia, the planet that struck Earth billions of years ago. Imagine that, the corpse of another world, buried deep inside our own, influencing the very volcanoes that shape our air. But we cannot reach them. We cannot touch them. We can only watch their ghostly silhouettes on our computer screens. The pressure at these depths is nearly 1 million times the weight of the atmosphere at sea level. At such intensity, the chemistry of the universe changes. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory has shown that oxygen and iron behave in ways that defy our textbooks. There are oceans of water trapped inside the crystal structure of minerals like ringwoodite. This is not liquid water, but a third state locked away in a rocky cage 500 kilometers down. Research published in the journal Science suggests there could be more water in the mantle than in all our surface oceans combined. A hidden reservoir, untouchable and vast, fueling the tectonic engine of our existence. Below the mantle lies the outer core, a swirling hell of liquid iron and nickel. This is the heart of the invisible villain that protects us, the magnetosphere. The heat here is estimated by the University College London to be over 6,000 degrees Celsius. That is as hot as the burning surface of the sun. It is a paradox that chills the bone. The very thing that keeps us alive, the magnetic field, is generated by a furnace so violent it would vaporize us in a heartbeat. We are separated from this cosmic fire by a mere 3,000 kilometers of rock. And then there is the inner core, a solid ball of iron the size of the moon, spinning at its own pace within the liquid shell. Some data suggests it might even be rotating faster than the rest of the planet. We do not know why. We do not know exactly how it formed or when it will finally cool. If the core cools completely, our magnetic shield fails. The solar wind would strip our atmosphere away, turning Earth into a sterile, frozen husk like Mars. We are living on a ticking geological clock that we cannot even see. The National Science Foundation continues to fund missions to hear the core, but the silence is deafening. Every year we realize that the solid ground is an illusion. We are a thin layer of biological dust resting on a massive, pressurized mystery. The deeper we look, the more we realize that Earth is not just a rock in space. It is a complex, multi-layered machine of unimaginable power. The Kola Superdeep Borehole was a needle prick on the hide of a leviathan. We stopped because the heat turned our drills into soft wax. The planet pushed back. It whispered that we were not ready to see the truth. 99% of our home remains a land of "here be dragons." We are explorers who have never left the front porch. The true journey has not even begun. It is a humbling, terrifying realization that the most alien place in the universe is right beneath your feet. As I look down at the dirt, I don't see soil. I see the roof of a cathedral that spans the width of the world. And we are still outside, shivering in the cold, waiting for the doors to open. Source: California Institute of Technology, Arizona State University, and the journal Science. The mystery of the deep is the ultimate human challenge. It is the final veil between us and the understanding of our origin. And for now, the Earth keeps its secrets buried in the dark. The abyss does not merely sit beneath us, it breathes. Every step we take on the surface is a step upon a lid. We are biological passengers on a vessel of molten iron and crushing silicate. For decades, we have tried to pierce the veil. The Kola Superdeep Borehole was our most violent scream into the silence of the crust. 12,262 meters. To the Earth, this is less than a scratch on the skin of an apple. To us, it was the absolute limit of human engineering. The deeper we go, the more the laws of our world begin to dissolve. Down there, the pressure is not a concept. It is a physical weight that seeks to flatten every atom of your being. At the base of that hole, the heat reached 180 degrees Celsius. It was a realm where the rocks no longer shattered. They flowed like warm plastic. The steel of our drills became as soft as butter in a furnace. We were forced to stop because the planet refused to be punctured any further. According to the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, we have barely grazed the upper crust. We are like ants trying to understand the interior of a mountain by biting a pebble. Why does this obsession persist? Why do we spend billions to touch a darkness that offers no air and no life? It is because the deep is our origin story. Every carbon atom in your lungs was once forged in the crushing heat of a planetary interior. We are looking for the heartbeat of the machine that keeps us alive. Without the churning of the outer core, our world would be a graveyard. The magnetic field is our only shield against the lethal radiation of the sun. If that liquid iron heart stops beating, we perish in a cosmic heartbeat. Researchers at the University of Cambridge suggest that the core is cooling, but at a rate we cannot fully comprehend. It is a slow, geological death that will take billions of years. But the mystery remains in the now. We know more about the craters on the far side of the moon than we do about the rock beneath our feet. Seismic waves tell us of blobs the size of continents sitting at the mantle core boundary. Geologists call them large, low-shear velocity provinces. They are monumental structures of unknown composition. They sit there, heavy and silent, influencing the volcanic destiny of our surface. I feel a strange vertigo when I look at the horizon. I realize that we are floating on a thin, fragile crust. The echo of the abyss is the realization of our own insignificance. We are a surface phenomenon. We are the moss on the hull of a gargantuan, subterranean engine. The drive to reach the center is not just curiosity. It is a survival instinct. We want to know the engine room of our only home. We want to understand the fire that gives us ground to stand on. But the Earth is a jealous guardian of its secrets. Every kilometer deeper is 1,000 times harder than the last. The pressure at the center of the planet is 3,600,000 times greater than at sea level. The temperature matches the surface of the sun, 5,200 degrees Celsius. It is a sun trapped in a cage of iron. We are separated from this inferno by a mere 3,000 kilometers. That is the distance from New York City to Denver. It is terrifyingly close. As a chronicler of these depths, I find a haunting beauty in our failure. The fact that we cannot reach the center keeps the mystery alive. It reminds us that there are still frontiers that cannot be conquered by a touchscreen or a satellite. The deep Earth is the final wilderness. It is a place where time is measured in millions of years. It is a place where the history of the solar system is written in crystals we will never see. We listen to the echoes of earthquakes to map the dark. We analyze the chemicals in volcanic plumes like detectives at a crime scene. But the truth remains buried. Deep, heavy, silent, we are the children of the crust, staring down into the basement of the world. And the basement is locked. The key is hidden in the physics of heat and gravity. One day, perhaps, we will find a way to descend. Until then, we live in the shadow of the abyss. We walk upon the roof of a kingdom we do not rule. The earth remains the ultimate thriller, a story with a beginning we can guess, but a center we can only dream of. Our obsession is the tribute we pay to the power that created us. And the echo we hear from the depths, it is the sound of our own pulse, racing against the clock of eternity. Dossier source credits: the secrets of the abyss are infinite, and the deeper we go, the darker the truth becomes. But the earth is not the only place where the shadows hide the unthinkable. Which earth mystery do you want me to decipher in the next dossier? Tell me what haunts your curiosity.